Today you're going to meet a man who has a long history in the music and audio industries. He's worked at some of the best recording studios like Studio 4 in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, assisted well-respected and award-winning engineers like Joe and Phil Nicolo, installed sound systems for some of the best music venues like the Mann Music Center in Philadelphia. He's simply put, the man behind the scene. He's designed, installed, and serviced many studios throughout the Delaware Valley, including Mind the Gap. Much of the local music and some of the biggest national recording acts over the past several decades has been tracked, mixed, and mastered in studios he's worked on. I've had the privilege to know him for decades. He's a musician, sound system designer, technical and mixing engineer, as well as business owner. This man is Chris Gately, and in my humble opinion, he's an unsung hero to the music community. And now you'll get to learn more about this man behind the scene. In our interview, you'll learn about his early beginnings, how his business evolved and at times radically changed, his thoughts about the music experience, and current projects he's working on. But first, let's start with where it all began. Chris, what made you get into the audio and music industries?
My parents were into music. My father made audio gear, and my mother came from a musical family. Her mother was a concert pianist who broke her back when she was young, and back in the 20s there was no air travel, so there was only trains, and she couldn't travel because it was painful, so she taught piano and raised a family. And my dad made audio gear. There was always music in the house. We had a decent music program at school, and I just loved it from the beginning.
Did you see yourself getting into engineering or becoming a musician?
When I was 8, I started making my first recordings. I was given a little Japanese battery-operated tape recorder with little tiny reels, and I would record stuff off the radio. And at that point, I was like, yeah, this is cool. I could see doing this for the rest of my life. When I was in my teens, I bought, to my father's dismay, a small drum set and started playing drums. My mother was very supportive of my playing music.
Now, why was he not into you playing drums?
My dad thought rock and roll was evil. He used to say, you play that stuff on the stereo and the tubes glow green.
With that, since you brought up your dad, he had a rather illustrious career, from what I understand, in the audio industry. Where did he find his success there?
He started when he was still in college working for one of the founders of the hi-fi business, Paul Weathers. And then he designed some corner horn loudspeakers and kind of had a living room business doing that for a while. And in the late 60s, he started Gately Electronics, which made originally little suitcase, attaché case mixers for the broadcast industry, and then he branched out into doing stuff for recording studios and such like that. After that business went under, he started the Hafler Company with David Hafler and was involved with that until Hafler sold to Rosgate Fossil. Oh.
It'll come to you.
Yeah, it'll come to me. That business was sold off in the mid-'90s, and he retired.
When he was doing that business in the living room, building loudspeakers?
Yeah, cabinets.
Cabinets. Were you helping him then?
No, I was like 2-3 years old. I did get taken to trade shows, though. My mom tells me that when I was really, really young, that I met some names that are used in a hi-fi world today, like Saul Morantz and Frank McIntosh and Avery Fisher and Herman Scott and Paul Klipsch. I met them. I don't remember. I was just a toddler. But that was back in the days when the hi-fi business was all little companies, and people took their families to the trade shows and such. Perpetual technological improvements are disruptive, and their effects on the music and audio industries in particular have been profound. Chris discusses how he faced these challenges and navigated through the ever-changing demands of his clients. This includes the advent of MTV,
which resulted in the decline of radio concerts by record companies and the rapid growth of professional recording studios in the 80s and 90s.
Now, when did you start your audio business, Chris?
I started my audio business officially on the 13th of October, 1977, although I had worked when I got out of college in 1973. I worked for my father's company for a while, and then after that I went and I worked for John Buffington and Lance Trickler at Mom's Wholesome Audio, assembling mixers for them. And then would go out evenings and help Joel Fine and Steve Tost at Sound Advice do radio concerts. Late 77, early 78, Joel Fine got called out to Hollywood to do sound for the Buddy Holly story. And he had, at that point, because he got a Oscar nomination for his work, because it was the first movie in decades where what you saw on screen was what you heard. It wasn't overdubbed or lip-synced or anything like that. So Joel stayed out there because all of a sudden he was in a glamorous Hollywood where the money was good, and he was hanging out with all kinds of famous people and working at some really cool places. So that all of a sudden there was a need for someone to handle the radio concerts here in town. So I got a call from Alex Demers at WIRQ saying, well, we can't get a hold of Joel because he's in L.A. Do you know someone that can do radio concerts? And I said, I can do it. And so he hired me to do Moon Mullins at the Main Point, and that worked out really, really well. And then he kept me busy, and I picked up work at WMMR and YSP and for record companies and such until 1981 when MTV came out, and all of a sudden the record companies wouldn't spend money on radio concerts for the 20 biggest markets. Instead, they would spend money on videos because it would go to the 350 biggest markets.
Simple math.
Yeah, very simple math. I can't blame the record companies for doing that.
How did things change in your business there?
Oh, the radio concert business just stopped.
So what did you do thereafter?
Well, I had, at that point, done enough wiring in studios and, sound systems and things like that I went on to do that pretty much full time.
What are some of the studios you've worked with?
Star Recording was the first of the big ones, and Studio 4 was involved with the original installation at the warehouse. Lots and lots of little studios. I worked at the Robin Hood Dell East, putting system in there. I also worked at the Robin Hood Dell West, which became the Mann Music Center, putting system in there, too.
With the rise of music downloads and the subsequent decline of vinyl and CD sales, the music experience has changed significantly. In short order, we no longer consume music in the form of a full-length album or CD, but rather in sound bites, where music is no longer the focus. It merely serves as a backdrop to everyday activities. Chris discusses how this shift adversely impacted the music experience, and in addition, chides the excessive use of compression in mastering audio.
Yeah, I think vinyl, when it's kept clean and played on a properly set up turntable, blows CD away.
There's bands today that still publish on vinyl, like, for instance, Pearl Jam.
Yeah, vinyl sales have gone up each of the last 18, 19 years.
And I think it's a reaction to the compressed formats such as MP3.
It's partly that, and it's partly also that there's a physical thing about it. You're more involved with putting the record on, cleaning the record, putting the record on, queuing it up. It becomes kind of a ritual to actually sitting down and listening to the music as opposed to pushing a button and then it's playing in the background while you do something else. The other thing about vinyl is that the artwork is huge.
Yeah.
As opposed to, looking at something on your iPhone or trying to squint and read the lyrics on a CD jacket. Instead, we're talking something that's a foot by a foot.
No, I mean, and just bringing up the band Yes. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, looking at Tales from Topographic Oceans, and The artist was Roger Dean, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. And I used to open that thing up and I used to go, my God, what a wonderful art piece this is, And you don't really get that with a CD. You don't really get that in digital media today. Yeah, I mean, you do get the experience of going to a website and hence interaction with the artists and so on. So there is an enhancement there, but the actual appreciation of the visual art has really fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, and like I said, it becomes a ritual so that you are more attuned to actually sitting down and listening to music. There was a big change happened to the way people perceive music. This happened in the late 70s. Two things happened within months of each other. The first was a company in San Francisco called Orban came out with a device for broadcasters. Their device was called the Optimod. Basically what it did is it broke the audio band up into 8 pieces, compressed each one separately, and then mixed them back together. And what that allowed program directors to do was to make the station louder. And the idea being that by being louder, they could be picked up better in fringe areas, thus increasing their particular listening area, which would mean that the station is more marketable to the sales department. The other thing that happened in that same period of time was the introduction of the Sony Walkman. Before the Walkman, people would gather in a common room in a house and listen to music, or if somebody had a system in their bedroom or in their dorm room, everybody else in proximity was listening to it too. When you traveled on a trip with the family, somebody got control of the radio and they would control what everybody else listened to. So music was a communal event. I mean, I remember when a Beatles record or a Stones record would come out, and me and my friends would go to somebody's house. One guy, hey, Bobby got the new Beatles record, let's go. And we'd be over together listening. We'd put it on and we'd listen in silence to the whole thing. And that was a communal experience. But with the Walkman, first of all, you didn't go to where the music was. You didn't go to a radio. You didn't go to a stereo. The stereo in people's houses were usually located in a communal place like a den or a living room or a recreation room. Instead, what happened with Walkman is that music became a very individual thing, a very personal thing, and you took it everywhere with you. I mean, within a year of the Walkman coming out, you'd travel on the subway and everyone would have headphones on, and you'd go out for a walk and there'd be people jogging and roller skating and whatever, and they'd have headphones on. And so music went from being something that you would actively sit and listen to something that became very passive to another activity. It became sonic wallpaper, something to keep your ears busy while you jogged or exercised or rode your bike or worked in the yard or whatever. And between that and the Orban Optimod, which basically compressed music, and the record companies were going, well, how come when I master a record it doesn't sound like the radio? They started asking mastering engineers to compress the final product.
This one goes to 11.
Yeah, basically. As a matter of fact, one of the more renowned mastering engineers, Bob Ludwig, who has done a lot of very good work. I mean, there's a lot of classical music that he has cut to disc and mastered that sounds very, very excellent. But Bob is particularly known for putting five pounds of music in a 2-pound box.
Extreme compression.
Extreme compression.
Or limiter.
Actually a combination of both. But I mean, there are some records that I have, or CDs that I have of his, that I'll be playing CDs and I'll throw one of his on, and all of a sudden it just comes out of the speaker louder.
Yeah, and on that note, Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if you ever listened to their CDs, the compression is so obvious. I mean, it's just smashed. It is so smashed.
That's Bob Ludwig.
Yeah, it's like when they're hitting the cymbals. I mean, you could just hear the cymbals just smashed. And Personally, I don't like that type of level of compression, but stylistically, I can understand the vibe of that genre and what they're going for. So you can make the argument that it's a stylistic type of thing, but I think in regard to mastering in general and making things in general louder, it's now going across all genres.
Oh, yeah, it definitely has, and it's not good for the music. It makes music less interesting to listen to.
Less dynamic.
It's less dynamic. It's perfect if you want to put music on in the background. And it's perfect when you're in the car because you're not reaching to turn the volume up and then turning it down, that kind of thing. But as far as sitting down and listening to it for enjoyment, I find when I play stuff that's highly compressed like that, I want to turn the stereo off and go do something else. It doesn't retain my attention.
Yeah, and actually you could also argue that it fatigues your ears.
Yes, it does.
When you have something at the same SPL repeatedly, after 20, 30 minutes, you're tired of listening to it. I can just look on the meters of my CD player, and see that the soft parts are loud and the loud parts are loud. When the song's starting up and it's just a guitar player starting the song, it's like pushing 0, and then the band comes in and it's like 1 dB more.
Well, I remember WIOQ did I'm trying to remember the name of the promotion. I think they called it It's Your Orchestra Week or something, where they threw some classical music in just to kind of shake programming up. It's in the late 70s. And they did a live broadcast of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I was listening to it at home and was running it through my cassette recorders. And I remember they were playing a very dynamic piece. Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, which is a fairly standard hi-fi demo piece. And the VU meters on a cassette deck were literally just hanging in midair. The compression that the station had put on it was so great.
Yeah, and probably not appropriate for that type of music.
Not appropriate at all for the music.
Chris has recorded and mixed numerous musical acts over the years, but one specifically has captured his attention. Cast in Bronze, performed by Frank Della Penna. What makes him stand out is the main instrument, the Carillon. The Carillon consists of 35 bells and is tuned to the universal standard of A432, which imparts an old-world sound. Chris discusses his work with Frank, as well as his take on the future of music.
Are you working on any music projects now, Chris?
I'm in the middle of working on a project with a friend of mine who plays the Carillon, and he's the only person in the world that makes a living playing on the Carillon, and what he does is he plays it with other musical instruments. Most Carillons are up in towers, and so there's either no room for other musicians to play up there because, the Carillon is bells. And the bells are really, really loud. So if you put another musician up in the tower, they would be deafened by it. Yet, because sound takes time to travel through the air, and towers are usually 70, 80 feet up in the air, there's no way musically to lock the time between what the Carillon's playing and what somebody on the ground would play. What my friend Frank has is a Carillon that's on wheels, and he's down on the ground. And so he had originally started with a live band, and they were like literally right there with him. But he grew tired of dealing with band politics and dealing with other musicians and their wackiness.
Here.
What he's been doing is going out and playing to tracks. He records his albums and then does a mix without the Carillon. He plays to the mix minus for his live shows. And he's managed to, in the last 20 years, to sell well over 200,000 CDs, yet he has practically no internet presence. He has no presence in the media, no radio
website?
play.
No.
He has a website.
Oh, okay.
But when I say no internet presence, he's not mentioned in other blogs or anything like that. But it's a very unusual act a very unusual instrument. Physically, it's the most demanding instrument to play. And a lot of people aren't aware that the instrument exists because most of the carillons are at churches where they get played before and after church services, or there are quite a few of them that are at universities where they might play for 10 or 15 minutes at noon. For example, there's one at Berkeley. That's that big bell tower when you see pictures of the Berkeley campus. There's a carillon there. But most people aren't aware that the instrument even exists.
And what is a carillon?
It's a set of tuned suspended bells, and then the clappers of the bells are tied by way of linkages to a keyboard that's played. It's not really keys like you would think a piano would have, but it's more like pegs sticking out, and you play them with your fists. And then they're linked to a set of pedals that are a lot like organ pedals. You play them with your feet. So you could play 4 notes at once, one note with each fist and each foot. But it takes a bit of effort to strike the bells.
And now, what kind of work have you done with him? Purely technical or engineering as well, combination thereof?
I've engineered in one form or another 6 CDs with him. This is his 13th CD, and I'm engineering it and I'm co-producing it with him.
And where has he played? Some notable venues.
He plays mostly at Renaissance fairs, but he played for Pope John Paul II up in New York City back in the early 90s. He's played the Alice Cooper's Hasty Pudding shows in Phoenix, Arizona. He plays Bethlehem Music Fest every year. He plays all 10 days, and he gets the highest number of comments from people that come to the Music Fest. As a matter of fact, he was playing in Colorado and only played 4 days at Bethlehem this year because of his Colorado commitment. And the office was flooded with complaints from people, where is he, where is he, how come he's not playing this year?
And what is the name of his act again?
The name of his act is called Cast in Bronze.
And his name?
His name is Frank Della Penna.
From the artist perspective, where do you see the music industry going?
The best music, the real music, is going to be marketed by independents. The best way to have control of what happens to your music is to do it yourself. At the same time, it's easier than it's ever been before for an independent to get music out there because we have internet and sources like iTunes and CD Baby and other places like that. There are people who make a living as consultants for this kind of thing, whereas 30 years ago you didn't. You kind of like were at the mercy of whatever the record company lawyers wrote into the contracts. Now there are people out there who will serve to act as career guidance counselors and will tell you what you're looking for before you sign a contract. Will look at it and be able to advise you, well, you want to do this, but you don't want to do that and such. But the whole concept of getting a record deal is
history.
It's counterproductive.
Kind of history.
It is almost kind of history because record companies, they're looking for something that's going to make them money and make them money fast. They're not willing to develop an artist. For example, Bruce Springsteen, it wasn't until his third record that his record company made a profit. And there are other artists like that. Now a label won't even look at you unless you can guarantee to sell them 1 million copies.
And with this whole kind of DIY movement from artists, recording themselves, publishing themselves, and so on, from what I understand, there's been actually a new type of service in the music industry, and that is label services. That is, what you were just, referring to, where they provide promotions and so on for a fee, of course, but to assist the artist in getting their music out, as opposed to having a contract where they collect the lump sum of money, that's initially earned, and sometimes you could argue, depending on the type of contract, unfairly earned, that these services, instead of doing that, you pay them a fee or negotiate a percentage where they will do promotional services to help you get your music out.
Yeah, and a lot of these people who are doing that are not imposing their particular artistic ideas upon the artist. As the Tom Petty line goes, the album's not out because I don't hear a single. You don't get that with a lot of what you're describing. You get people who are taking the product as given to them, and they just take the ball and run with it, as opposed to saying, well, I want you to sound like XYZ flavor of the week.
Well, look, Chris, it was really great talking with you. I think it was some very interesting points that you made, and I hope you enjoyed your time today.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Cool.
And thanks for listening to this podcast from Mind the Gap. Be sure to visit us at WeMindTheGap.com for the latest updates. Also like us on Facebook with search term Mind the Gap, all one word, and on Twitter at Mind the Gap. Special thanks to Nick DiCecco and Jordan Rode for engineering, and we hope to see you next time. I'm Marc A. Gallo, your host, and this ends in 3, 2, 1.